there's nothing really to be had there substantial.
RJ Abeytia, he covers USC inside Troy.com. Also, Ryan Abraham is a part of that. We had Ryan on quite a bit the last couple of years with realignment and much more. And RJ joins Craig Smoak, David Smoak here on 365 Sports. RJ, thank you very much for your time. So is right now the football program, yes, there's 2 losses, but is the football program, in your opinion, kind of a house of cards that this thing could fall apart?
House of cards might be a little bit much, but it's a shaky foundation right now. No question. I think, and again, as you guys know, in football, the stuff doesn't happen instantly, right? There's always a run up. There's always a build up, both to the good and the bad. And just to throw another, curveball into the situation, Lincoln Riley has actually been taken ill and is actually missing practice today for the second straight day. So there's all kinds of stuff USC is dealing with at this point. And when you look at the state of the program, there are some significant red flags, both on the field and just kind of, internally with what's going on. And so, yeah, I think house of cards, maybe, but there are definitely concerns right now. And it's definitely a very unstable time, easily the most unstable moment since Lincoln Riley arrived.
RJ, there's still games to play, obviously, but with that second loss, I mean, now the bigger hopes are dashed, right? And
Yeah.
An excruciating loss, the way that it was seemingly out of their control and then in their hands, and then Bear Alexander makes the penalty, and then it all falls apart after that. Just you talk about red flags on the field. What were your feelings about what you saw in the Utah game, and just where this program as a team on the field currently stands?
Well, I think the two big takeaways from the Utah game for me were, number one, the self-inflicted issues. Bear Alexander, as you pointed out, had that bad penalty at the end, but he had 2 roughing penalties that gave what had been a struggling Utah offense 30 free yards. And as we saw at the end of the game, 15 crucial yards. It would have been 4th and short with the game on the line deep in Utah territory. Instead, Utah's at midfield with time and field position on its side. And again, when you only need the field goal to win, it's not like, you just have to defend the goal line. You don't have a margin for error there. So, a lot of self-inflicted stuff, but also just a lot of, quite simply, not good enough. I mean, Utah's offense, as we said, had been struggling. They exceeded their season average in yards per play, yards per carry, and they wildly exceeded their average in yards per attempt when you talk about the passing game. And on the other side of the ball, it's now 3 straight games where USC has been unable to score 30 points in regulation. And that's a major problem because, everybody going into the season was trying to talk themselves into the idea of, okay, we're going to have an elite offense. Just give us anything defense. And that was kind of the blueprint. And right now the defense is not giving them nearly enough of what they need, but the offense has also faltered. And that's a major, major concern when you're talking about a team coached by Lincoln Riley and quarterbacked by Caleb Williams.
Is this something that the fan base, and this is everywhere, I mean, in various programs that people cover, if offense is not doing well, that it's the coordinator. Is this a simple fix on its Grinch and they move on from him, or is that just like too simplistic?
It's too simplistic. I think, look, personally, I have held off on the Grinch slander far longer than most, but there's no question right now it's just not working. And you look at that game against Utah, and you've got 2 explosive plays from Utah on the exact same pass pattern in which an outside edge rusher is being forced to cover one-on-one downfield. And it went about as well as you think it went. Utah got 89 yards on those 2 plays, including if I'm not mistaken, a 53-yard touchdown. So, it's not working, and the criticism of Alex Grinch is valid. You can't push back very hard on that. Now, that being said, they are not. I literally texted this today. They are not a coordinator change away from being an elite defense. I think a new coordinator certainly moves the needle, but they struggle. I mean, they just struggle. That's just the bottom line. Like, they don't win. When you look at the elite defenses in college football and you talk about being stout against the run, being able to get pass rush without blitzing, the kind of the standard things that you look at when you want to call a defense good, they don't have it. And the most alarming byproduct of all of it is they have just no ability to limit explosive plays. And, they've been decent as a third down defense, but, that only works if you're not giving up huge chunks of yardage, and they are just unable at this point to stop teams from doing that on a consistent basis.
RJ, there was thoughts that even with the idea that, hey, they're probably not going to be great defensively, but hey, they've got the Heisman Trophy winner, right? And they've got all these weapons and they're going to be great. But how disappointing in some ways has the offense been, given the amount of hype and just the fact that you had a Caleb Williams coming back? What do you see as some of the issues on that side of the ball, and how big of the issues have they been?
Well, I think they've been two, and one of them has been Caleb Williams, and we can get to that in a second. The bigger contrast that few people talk about is last year, Lincoln Riley inherited an offensive line that was basically set at 4 of the 5 positions and included 2 All-Americans, including one at center and one at left guard. And so he inherited a pretty set and veteran offensive line, and they were good last year. They were good as a run blocking group, and they were pretty decent as a pass protection group. This year, he inherited a scenario, not inherited, but this year it changed. Both the All-American guys left, and USC had to fill 4 of the 5 positions with new starters. And it just hasn't worked. They brought in some guys in the transfer portal, but the group as a whole has just not performed. And to the point where last Saturday, they flipped the right guard and the right tackle, which, when you get to game 8, that's just not something you should have to do. So that is a huge difference from last year. And the other difference is just Caleb Williams' play. He was elite last year against pressure by most of the advanced metrics. This year, he is struggling significantly. And it's not just that he's struggling significantly against pressure. He's contributing to the pressure. He's had issues holding on to the ball longer than you'd want to, and it's leading to bad plays. And last year, on a lot of occasions, it led to highlight plays, but this year it's leading to trouble. And so, he has dipped from a performance standpoint, and so is the offensive line. And so given that, it's not as surprising to see the offensive struggle. But like you said, coming into the season, nobody anticipated it to look like this at any point.
RJ, was the lack of player availability Saturday night, which has gotten a lot of publicity, first time I think that even Ryan Abraham was mentioned ever, or since he's covered them, the number 2 media market in the country, the spotlight, etc. Was that calculated? Was that maybe a certain player or two? Maybe Caleb Williams didn't want to speak with the media, or was that Lincoln Riley protecting his own?
I don't think it was Lincoln Riley's first choice. I'll just say that because there's, as you said, there's a lot of speculation, and there's not been anything that I can necessarily confirm or put at the feet of an individual person right now. But I think the general consensus of it was, first of all, it's such a conspicuous thing for all the reasons that you just mentioned, but even regardless of the media market, like it's part of the process, right? Like you talk after wins and you talk after losses, and not to get all highfalutin, but just as part of the educational process, right? Just as the school servicing the students, one of the things you're supposed to be teaching them is accountability. And it manifests for the football team in being available and talking. So I don't think anyone's ready to say definitively how that came about, but it was a bad look, and it certainly didn't help where they are right now as a program.
And then on top of that, and Lincoln Riley might have, something that's very bad. I mean, from having a bad case of the flu, pneumonia, whatever it might be. But him not being there, does that just add more fuel to the fire?
Yeah, I mean, it's never ideal. You guys know how active a head coach is in season and how so much of what they do spins and revolves around the head coach, number one, being there, but not only that, but running things, and that goes especially true for Lincoln Riley. Like, USC practices are Lincoln Riley run practices. He is a very active coach. He is very hands-on. He is very involved, as you'd imagine, in film study and in game planning and prep. And if anything, he'd taken on a bigger role this year, trying to work with the defense as well. So, there's never a good time for the head coach to not be around in season, but right now was arguably the worst time for it to be happening. And like you say, knowing Lincoln Riley, it has to be something significant to keep him away from this team. And so, yeah, it just literally couldn't be happening at a worse time.
Well, I guess good news, RJ, is the schedule lightens up, right? Just kidding. I mean, there's Cal, but then after that, there's 3 top 25 teams staring them in the face if UCLA can hang in there. Well, so that's going to be a very interesting final month. I was just curious about just sort of the feel around the Pac-12 with them, getting knee-deep into conference at this point and it being the last hurrah and all that jazz. I'm sure there's a lot of people, loving that they're losing a game like the Utah game, but has it been, noticeably a kind of a send-off thing where heated crowds, or is that just, not even on really the radar because there's enough already on their plate?
Yeah, the weird thing is, I think that the nature of USC's schedule was such that the first half ahead of Notre Dame was just not, the results were presumed. And the second half of the schedule is so backloaded that I think people were just excited about big game after big game after big game, and I think there hasn't been, once the season starts and you think you're chasing a championship and you're hoping you're chasing a college football playoff appearance, it hasn't, the nostalgia factor hasn't manifested itself the way you might think it would in the last go around. Now, from the point of view of the opponents, I'm sure it's a chop licking situation. I'm sure Utah is just tickled to be able to say they finished off Pac-12 history with 4 straight wins against USC, including last Saturday. And I know Washington will be gunning for them. Cal will be gunning for them in the final, Bay Area weekender game that USC has to go play this Saturday. And then certainly when you talk about going to Austin Stadium to play Oregon they're going to the Big Ten, but for the last Pac-12 time, that's a big deal. And then finishing with UCLA, which is always a big deal. So I think it's less, there's been less focus from the SC standpoint on the end of the Pac-12 and kind of more concern at this point about the end of USC's championship hopes at this point.
RJ, one more question back to Caleb Williams. And there was discussion. There were even the possibilities of, hey, he should shut it down. Again, there's games to be played. And he's the Heisman Trophy, the reigning Heisman Trophy winner.
Emmanuel Acho said this. Yeah. I mean, that's where the conversation started.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it burns my soul when I see that. I know players are opting out of bowl games now. That now is a habit because of the horrible injury that occurred. I just went blank on the Notre Dame running back. But Jalen Smith, the linebacker. Have you seen or any kind of inkling that might even be true, that he's on the edge of shutting things down, or is that unfair to bring it up?
I don't think it's unfair to bring it up just because of the era that we live in.
Yes. Yep.
I think when I used to cover Stanford, and when Christian McCaffrey shut it down and it was a Sun Bowl, it wasn't like the Rose Bowl or anything, but when he did that, it still reverberates, because suddenly you're just like, wait a minute, thing that we thought of as off the table is now on the table. And so I do think there's a divide, like you guys are saying, between the bowl game, which is, essentially 3 weeks of practices. And if you're not in a championship, it's 3 weeks of practices for a game that's tough to get up for a lot of guys. But that's different than you've got 2 top 10 teams on the schedule plus your rival. I don't know if you look at the cost benefit, it's hard to argue at this point that the benefit of ducking those games outweighs the cost. But, it's a week to week evolution. These things change, and so I think it's worth monitoring. It's not crazy to bring it up. We have got no indication that it is on the verge of happening. But that doesn't mean that won't change 1 week, 2 weeks, or 3 weeks from now. It really just comes down to the fact that he is the presumed number 1 pick in the draft. And as long as he feels he is still the presumed number 1 pick in the draft, they're going to go and operate the way they think they have to operate. And that's really the priority at this point.
Good stuff, RJ. I'm glad Ryan hooked me up with you and had you on the show. We appreciate your time a great deal. Thank you.
Anytime, guys. Thanks for having me.
RJ Abeytia with us from Inside Troy on USC, from my God, what's happened to us, to the Lincoln Riley's missed a couple of practices.